Welcome, everyone, to our Stanford Cyber Policy Center weekly lunch seminar. I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Elizabeth Paté-Cornell, the Burt and Dee Dee McMurdy Professor in the School of Engineering and a Senior Fellow by courtesy of the Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies. Her specialty is engineering risk analysis with applications to complex systems, think space, medical, offshore oil platforms, cybersecurity, and so on. Her work has been based on probabilistic and stochastic models in artificial intelligence. She's a member of the National Academy of Engineering, the French Academy of Technology, the NASA Advisory Council, and a distinguished visiting fellow or scientist of the Jet Propulsion Lab. She was a member of the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board between 2001 and 2008. She holds a BS in mathematics and physics from Marseille in France, an engineering degree from the Institut Polytechnique de Grenoble. Did I say that close? Good. My son is taking French lessons, so he would also be here to. And an MS in operations research and a PhD in engineering economic systems, both from our very own Stanford University. She's the author or co-author of numerous publications, including several Best Paper Awards. She was awarded the 2002 Distinguished Achievement Award of the Society for Risk Analysis, of which she's a fellow, the Informs Ramsey Medal of Decision Analysis, and an honorary PhD from the University of Strathclyde, and the IEEE Ramo Medal for Systems Engineering and Science in 2021. Her recent work focuses on cybersecurity for specific systems and spacecraft design and monitoring. In her talk today, warnings of cyber threats and active risk management, she will present a warning systems model in which early stage cyber threat signals are generated using machine learning and artificial intelligence techniques. Before I invite her to the podium, our run of show is Dr. Paté-Cornell will provide a presentation, after which we are eager to hear your questions, so get your minds turning on questions. And with that, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. I want to reassure you right away, there will be no equation in my story. And what I'm going to tell you about is the work that I have done with one of my doctoral students, who is a lieutenant colonel now at Carnegie Mellon at the head of an AI center of the Army. So we decided to look at warnings of cyber attacks in low Earth orbit, cyber attacks with artificial intelligence. And we used the example of a system which came from the DoD, and we modified, of course, because otherwise I wouldn't be presenting it, and just to try to make our engineering systems safer and smarter. So see the attacks coming, and make sure that we try. We're never sure of anything. In fact, we try to stop it along the way. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about cyber risk analysis and our general model. And then I'll show you about warnings and management of cyber attacks. And what we try to do is to identify and hopefully stop the potential attackers. So how do we do risk analysis? The objective is to support decisions under uncertainty and to set priorities. So in our case, is do we let the actors penetrate the system or not? And do we stop them? And of course, we do not know which ones are the good guys, which ones are the bad guys. But I'm going to show you how we got a lot of information nonetheless. So we quantify uncertainties about these actors, good or bad, using Bayesian probability and a scenario analysis that includes human organizational factors and our experience. So we also want to look at systems dynamic in adversarial situation. But what is the most important for us, one of the important things, is to separate the probabilistic assessments from value judgments. What you prefer is not necessarily the most likely. So let me give you a few cyber attacks, examples of cyber attacks. You know, attacks on industries, services, countries. You are well aware, I'm sure, about attacks on target hospitals, ransomware, and interference in elections. including their attempt to try to interfere with the French elections, which I've watched with amusement, and the cyber attacks in military conflicts, which is very important these days, as you know. Attacks on infrastructure and threats to industrial control systems. And the example is Stuxnet in 2010, a virus that was considered the first one in that particular era, new era. Okay, so what are the objectives? Focus on a specific organization with proactive cyber protection given the uncertainties. Check whether the organization knows its computer systems. You would be very amazed at the number of organizations that do not know their system. They know what it does, they vaguely know the entries, the entries and the outputs, but they do not know what's inside. Decide whether the risk that we compute is acceptable. Identify the risk management options from system structure to operational processes. We may want, yes, to change the structure of the system. Assess the risk and the benefits of cyber features and set priorities among the options given the budgets and the operational constraints. Let me say that I started this at NASA, one of the centers that gave me a large database to look at to see how things were working. But it's not what I'm going to present to you today. The model that I'm going to use today comes from the DoD because my co-author had all the entries that he needed. And of course, we have modified it, otherwise I couldn't talk about it. This is what a model can look like without any equations. What you see here in these oval blocks are random variables, most of them, or random events. And at the top, you have what is the defender. That's we know what it is. That's why you have a double line. Now, given the cyber attackers' target, defenders, what do you think the objectives of the attackers group can be, given that you have an idea of who might be the attacker groups? The attacker groups on let's say, a hospital are not going to be the same one as a company that makes electronic components. And the question, of course, is whether we have insiders involved in the attack, and all that means that we target vulnerabilities and the objectives of the group themselves and its vulnerabilities are going to influence the attack scenarios. And my machine is not working in front of me because something has cut off the signal, which is all right. We'll get back to it. Okay, so first thing, we want to recognize the attackers. And you know them, the script kiddies, the nation states. You know what they are generally, and we had no surprise. And we generally looked at them according to the time at which they work, which makes it easier. Insiders, credit card skimmers, grey hat hackers that play on both sides. Anyway, a whole bunch of people. Now we have two distinct kinds of cyber attacks. The operational ones, routing attacks on organizational system. In my case of a space, the Space Center, it was a space example for which statistics may have been gathered. Often, most of the cost of the cyber risk is to gather these statistics and to react. And then the catastrophic, destructive attacks that may not have happened yet, but could threaten the organization, and in my case of a space center, the loss of a mission. We have no statistics, thank God, but it requires an in-depth Bayesian analysis of the attack signals. So distinction may be fuzzy, we may have close calls, but the data and the analysis are different between the two. The first ones, we have some statistics, and for the second ones, we have essentially Bayesian probability. That means we have decomposed the scenarios into events. We look at the probabilities of these events using both expert opinions and models of whatever they do, and we look at the dependencies among them. Now, in the insurance world, which is where we started, they have the following question. What, for a target organization, the client, manage the risk and decide what insurance they need and how much they are willing to pay. Now, for an insurance company, for example, Swiss Reinsurance, which I don't pick at random, they were the first ones to invite us years ago, decide how much they want to charge for cyber insurance, given that they may have dependencies among the attacks on their clients and a lot of money to pay at some point. So there are several ways to manage the cyber risk. One of them is to gather warnings of potential cyber attacks, and what that means that we need to gather information about the potential adversaries and their behaviors, observe the signals of attacks in progress, that's called the kill chain, manage the gate's closure, stop the attacker, and information about the kill chain in progress is processed by machine learning that include all the uncertainties. So the key here is that we keep all the uncertainties and we want to present the uncertainties about the result to the people who are going to use these results to make a decision. Okay, so now from our cyber risk research group, warnings of cyber attacks, and again, my co-author is Colonel Isaac Faber, now at Carnegie Mellon. So what do we want to do? Controlling which actors are allowed to process inside the defender's system. We have to assume that sooner or later, if they really want to, they will be able to get inside. Identify the legitimate actors and blocking the others. If you sell T-shirts, you want your customers to be able to buy T-shirts, but you don't want the bad guys to come in and get the money from your T-shirts. So you have a gate policy, which is a response to steps in that kill chain and the decision to open or close links in a network. So it's a hybrid decision about system access between a robot and a human. So we have a hybrid artificial intelligence model, which makes it much more interesting. What the robot, quote unquote, does is the AI system makes most of the easy decisions. But the robot has a threshold on a level of uncertainty and a level of damage at which the robot passes the hand to a human being who has more experience and more perspective. So it's a hybrid team. So again, a hybrid decision system, as I said, two agents, the robot and the human operator. Now, some of the challenges in AI is to have the facts versus the values. And here is a problem that you encounter all the time in artificial intelligence. The facts information processed by the AI system is relatively straightforward when it is Bayesian updating. The value system involves criteria, attitudes, and these thresholds are included in the AI software. And it's one of the reasons, in my opinion, why people are afraid of AI, because it may mean that the risk attitude that has been introduced in the system may not be that of the decision maker. Think about it as your visit to your doctor, and your doctor most likely has an AI system in which it looks at first what's ailing you, and second what people generally do when they have the same thing. Now, the first part is informational and good. The second part, I've always said, it's not because they do that in another part of the country or in another part of the town that I necessarily want to do that. I want my own values to enter the system. You would be surprised at the fact that it's not always well received, let's say. Okay, so here's my hybrid decision system in action. We have a central database. I'm going to show you how we manage it. And it evaluates data for decisions, passes it to the robot. Says, I'll do the obvious low-impact stuff. And the robot, if the decision utility passes the recommendations, then passes it to the human who says, well, tell me when the decision is not obvious, high impact, and I have to intervene. So what's my process? Generate early signals of attack threats, And attackers' characteristics, I'm going to show you what they are. Using AI in a practical environment, that system that we arranged and changed, modified from a DoD system. Decisions to leave a gate open or to close it inside the computer. The decision maker, again, super expert, a robot and a human. The robot passes the hand to the human if there is too much uncertainty or if the potential losses are too large. And it learns with more information. So that's where you have the AI and the machine learning. The result is an ability to find the optimal security gate policy so that you don't spend too much time and you let an actor come in or move on or not, given the signals that you get from the kill chain. I'm going to show you a kill chain. There it is. And the source is Lockheed Martin. They're pretty good at that. And the steps in the attack planning and execution. So first you put yourself in the shoes of the attacker. Reconnaissance, getting information about the entry points in the defender system. Then weaponization, deliverable payload design. Spent quite a lot of time deciding how they're going to attack you. Then they send the attack delivery, they send the attack weapon to the defender system. Then exploitation, they execute the code on the defender system. They install the malware on the asset. And then there is command and control, command channels for remote manipulation of the victim, the defender, and actions on objectives. Accomplish the original goal with hands-on keyboard access. So this is the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain, exactly what I showed you, except my presentation was simpler. And the defender's goal is, again, signal identification and detection at every step of the cyber kill chain. So you focus on the attacker. The attacks are not single occurrences. You see some people quite a few times, and they range from a few simple steps to repeated elaborate events, and that's exactly what you want to catch. So the defender's objective is to learn the adversary's behavior patterns and to detect stages of attack in progress. So let me show you an example of a timeline of an attack. Well, it takes a few weeks to probe for vulnerabilities in the system. Then preparing the malware for a specific system, that's quickly done. Then to plan the attack, it's quickly done too. But what is very quickly done is in few minutes to deliver exploit, control the host, execute the attack, and maintain the control. That's the part that's the most scary, and you have to make sure that as a defender, you're prepared to intervene at that stage. So, what analysis do we do? First, we analyze and model the cyber risk. We start with the defender system, structure, management practices. Sometimes. I remember the water system of a town in the northeast where they had no clue about their system because the poor fellow who had designed it had died and had not left anything that could be very helpful. So they had to open the system and look at its guts to decide what to do. So you want to identify the elements of kill chain and signals and the steps in the attack and the behavior of the bad guys. Then you have to assess the probability of error, and that's the most difficult part because, it's an imperfect signal about potential attackers. So you have type 1 and type 2 errors. There is good actors taken for bad actors and bad actors for good actors. And you have to determine then what's the best risk management option given the kinds of signals that you can observe and things that will protect the core of the system where you have what these guys are trying to get to, but will allow it to function as intended, again, if you sell your T-shirts. So what's the algorithm that we use? We look at signals of threats. We have a collaborative decision between the robot and the human decision maker. We have uncertainties in the outcomes, whether we're going to be successful or not, and we want to keep that in mind. And then we make a decision based on a utility function. And I'm sure most of you have had decision analysis. And the utility function reflects your preferences and your risk attitude. So as you can imagine, someone who is more risk-averse might close the gates more than someone who is more risk-prone and want to favor the customers. So behaviors and decision gates. What are my basic concepts? First, we look at the actors, not the attacks initially. We focus on the actors to see what are their bad habits or their good habits. Anyway, we want to recognize them. We look at their behaviors, data about what we have observed about actors doing, and then we develop a gate policy to stop an actor, to optimize the system value based on the expected utility of outcomes of the gate decisions and the cost, the loss of an attack. And again, our goal is to block the threats and to allow the legitimate customers. This the key story, the key figure of my story. This represents the inside of my computer. I enter from the left and I exit to the right. In blue, we have the entry points. You can see that. In blue, the legitimate activity, people who want to buy your T-shirts. In red, you have the threat activity, the bad guys who are trying to get to your core to get your money. And you can see now gates that are open or closed. And so what you can do is to open and close these gates given the signal. And you have at the bottom the kill chain, reconnaissance, weaponization, delivery, exploitation, control, execution, and maintenance. Okay, so that's your kill chain. And that's the time. Okay? So you see that the first gate, the threat activity, one of the threat activities is stopped. You see that the blue generally goes to the end, except that they are stopped at the last one in the upper one. The reds, in fact, are stopped a few times, but in fact have one path where they get to the core and get to your money or to something else. The list of your customers might be what they want. So what we did is to place 18 honeypots around the world. The honeypot is a cybersecurity mechanism that uses a manufactured attack target to lure cyber criminals away from legitimate targets. But they also gather intelligence about the identity, the methods, and the motivation of the potential adversary. So it's very useful way of knowing who is interested. So where did we put them? Well, just about everywhere. We had one in Virginia, London, Toronto, in Brazil, Frankfurt, Seoul, California, in several places, and Southeast Asia. I show you here the cloud service providers. And total observation, we had about 600,000. So we had a reasonably big database. And those who had a unique IP address, 50,000. The number on blacklists, oh yes, because there are companies that keep blacklists of bad guys who have been detected, observed by people, and are reported. So we had 20,000 people on blacklists who tried to enter. And then we look at those who give us multiple entries. They enter the first time, and they are intrigued, and they want to continue. So as you can see, we had quite a few, 22,000, who came more than once. So those are the interesting ones. So we place the honeypots. That's my honeypot. And you see the honeypot plus the critical stack give us information that we send to the actors, the legitimate agents. We don't send it, excuse me. That allow us to identify or to put a probability on the agents to be legitimate or to be nefarious. So we have a critical stack that's fed by commercial companies that identify threats, blacklist, and that's updated all the time. So the raw data are obtained from the honeypots. So we gather information about the attackers' identities, methods, and motivations. As I said, where they live. In general, you get an idea with the time at which they work. But by the way, they may decide to work at 2 a.m. just to show you. So then you update the probability of threats for each potential newly identified attacker. What are the elements of the system itself? Security stack, which is a collection of devices that's supposed to protect the organization. We have external information that comes all the time. Intelligence reports, industry information. It could be that some other company has been attacked in a similar way, so you can recognize that. And the perspective that human may have, and that's not in the system. So for example, another company, as I said, was attacked, so you have new data and updating. Your central database is a big data set that learns over time using all the information that you can send to it with the probability that this information is correct. So that's the Bayesian updating part. Okay, so this is what the system looks like. You have security stack, and I show you the firewalls, the intrusion detection systems, the devices that allow masking other devices behind the entrance, protected network, excuse me. And that information is sent to a central database that also receives external information and sends back that information to both the robot and the human agent. So you see what is connected and what is used, what information is used in this process. So my general model structure, my assumptions, the threats and legitimate requests arrive over time following a binomial distribution, because that's easy. The superagent must decide if the gate should be open or closed based on the expected utility of the outcomes and a risk preference that has been input in the system. That's, again, something that the decision maker may want to modify in some cases. So then opening of the closing of the gate controlled by your decision maker. Okay, so again, now the model formulation. The threats, an attempt to pass through a gate is a behavior that you can observe and control. The super agent makes a decision. In the beginning, and that's the most important part, the analyst makes most of the decision, and the robot, the artificial intelligence system, learns from what the man is doing. After that, the robot often makes the decisions given what it knows from the central database that is constantly updated. But again, if the uncertainties or the consequences are too high, the robot passes the hand to the man or the woman. Notation of gates and actors. I'm going to show you for a minute how we... G is a gate, I is the index of actors, PGI is the probability that an actor I is trying to proceed through the gate G and it is legitimate or an attacker. And U is the utility of the superagent, and again, it reflects the risk attitude of the organization. So this is the AI algorithm, and it's the only thing that's close to equations that I will show you. You start, external data arrive at the start point, and there is an attempt to enter the system. The central database is updated with the gate decision algorithm and Bayesian updating. The superagent decides whether to open or close the gate, an action here that you see. Then the security stack gets into action. The threats are observed at that stage, but with some uncertainty, and the outcomes, losses or benefits, are assessed through the utility function of the organization manager. In other terms, it's these what we call rewards is in fact often a cost, and it's the manager must decide what kind of utility function to put on that, and that is what will guide the decisions. Okay, so here is a decision tree. You must have seen that, I suppose, in your life. From the left to the right, we have the decision to open or to close a gate, and you see if it's closed, well, the outcome is 0. If it's open, well, you have different probabilities of having different actors being good or bad, and you have an outcome and you have a utility for that outcome. Enough for anything that looks like a model. So active learning, focus on the central database. The robot observes an incoming signal, gets information, decides to open or close the gate in the optimal way given what it knows, and then the results are observed and legitimate to attack. What's very important is the Bayesian updating of the central database. What that means is you have a certain probability that a different type of actor could be a good guy or a bad guy, but you have also a likelihood that your information is not perfect. And so you find now what is the probability, given that new information, that what you see coming your way is a good guy or a bad guy. So, example of scenario. So at the beginning, the expert makes decisions about gate management, and the robot learns. I'm going to show you how it works. Then the robot makes the decision by default and passes the hand when it's above its head. And some of the gates, as I said, require human intervention for much longer than until the robot becomes confident that it has enough data. And the assumption is that the system does not change. That is, we learn. But later, the robot can call for help. And this is the, how can I say, this is the result figure. What you have on the vertical axis are gates. And I think I have 17 gates here. And you see in red or in blue who makes the decision. And you see that, no, I don't have a light, but that doesn't matter. At the top, you see that the expert, the human being, makes decisions for quite a while because there is enough uncertainty that it doesn't want to pass it to the robot yet. But if you look at, let's say, gate number 13, pretty quickly the human being decides, okay, the robot can do it. What's interesting is what I've circled in white, where the robot, the expert, has been making decisions for quite a while. And then at that point where I've put this circle, the robot figures out that, again, as I said, it's above its head because the uncertainties are too much or the consequences are too much. So it calls back the human being who is going to make the decisions for a short while. Of course, at the bottom is a time axis. So you see, and finally the robot takes over. Excuse me. So this is the key to showing how the robot and the human being interact in the decision system. So what are the powers and the limitations of the AI system? And it's not only for this case. In the first part, you have a fact-based part. So the system processes, updates the data based on information gathered from the outside or from decisions. But in the second part, that's the value-based part, and we have transparency issues. You have the preferences, the values, the utility functions, and the risk attitude of the organization that are needed to assess the outcomes. But also, we need to determine the threshold at which the robot is going to pass the hand to the operator. And the end user has a problem, because the end user may not understand how the information was gathered and processed, what were the value functions that have been introduced in the system in the first place, and the user may not have the time to observe this, to absorb the information before making a decision. And so what are the takeaways from this whole story? First, the role of the artificial intelligence system. One can use the past behaviors of the actors as signals of threat to make decisions, to open or close the gates. A good solution is to have a hybrid decision system, a human in the loop. So you have both an AI, a robot, and a human being who makes decisions when the robot doesn't have enough information. But the potential problem that the case here, and that's the case also in other circumstances, is one of transparency. Make sure that the value functions that the AI system are those of the user, and that the user understands the information and its sources. Now, some conclusions about cyber risk in general. The perception of cyber risk is often apocalyptic, and it may be so. The question is, what do we do? So risk analysis is never perfect, so I want to emphasize that. But it brings some reality into perception. So it allows you for a more rational approach to risk mitigation. Now, one needs to understand the system structure. That's first thing. There's a lot of qualitative research that has been done in private-public policies regarding the possibility, feasibility, and legality of various protective measures. But I can tell you that as far as I know, for the moment, there's very little quantitative risk analysis involving potential damage, probabilities of attack scenarios, and effectiveness of options. Now, that is changing, and I know because I get requests of students who want to come and do their PhD in my team, where I've had 5 or 6 officers of the Army. For some reason, the Army liked what we were doing, but also some who are not, and were civilians. And so we have a lot of good people looking at interesting things. For example, what is the optimal level of connectivity in a system? Because at any time you put a new connection, you generally put a new vulnerability. So we have done all kinds of things. This is a very interesting topic for me. And for the moment, I'm also chairing a committee of the national academies, all 3, on risk analysis methods for nuclear war. So let me tell you that this is a useful place to start, and that the question of the decision maker knowing what's going on and knowing where the information comes from and never letting anything, what can I say, anything that's a robot or looks like a robot making any decision is extremely important. Okay, I will leave it at that, and I'll be delighted to take your questions.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm supposed to sit here, I'm told.
Yes, we have, this is our fireside talk. Thank you, that was fascinating. I have lots of questions.
Okay.
I wanted to and I hope you all are ready with questions too. And for those joining us online, I believe there's a mechanism for you to submit questions. We will do our best to get to all of them. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about this concept of gates. Yeah. Just so I make sure I understand, yeah. The gates correspond to steps in Lockheed Martin's kill chain.
In the kill chain. No, it's Lockheed Martin, but it's everybody.
Yeah.
It corresponds to what you see people doing. So you see, they are trying to enter my system. They are trying to bring in a new software that I don't recognize. That's another one. So it could be that it's perfectly legitimate software, but it doesn't look that way. Then they are clearly trying to move inside my system. Then I begin to worry about it. And in fact, one of the best things to do is to design your system so that it's a maze. And these guys from the outside are not going to go straight to the core. You're trying to make sure that they get lost, essentially, inside your system. So that's pretty much what's going on.
Great. And can you tell us a little bit more about the honeypots?
Oh, the honeypots?
Yeah.
Well, let me say, I wish we had Isaac here to tell you more about the honeypots because he's the one who did it. And what he did was to construct these systems that attract people who were coming. Honeypots look a bit like our system, of course, have a lot in common. So attract people who are curious. And they come and visit you. Yeah, so what's going on here? And then they come back if they think there is something interesting. And then they come back another time. to see what's going on there. Let me say that we have had quite a few Chinese visits, and we recognize them, and you know, they come regularly, and so we know pretty much what it is. And so the importance of the honeypots is to realize who is coming, what are the bees coming to the honeypots. That's
And how does this it's a prototype, as I understand
yes, it is. Yeah.
How does this prototype compare to the performance of a non-robot, just a human performing the same functions? Where are we with respect to that performance differential?
Well, the robot has a lot more information because things are going much faster. So, excuse me, every time there is a signal, it's absorbed by the system, and the robot goes very, very fast and gets information very quickly, much faster than a human being. Now, the truth is that the robot is pretty much determined by whatever is in the system that has been designed in the beginning. So it has much less flexibility and also less perspective than a human being who has seen the world and keeps seeing the world. And so that's the difference.
Great. Well, I will open it up to questions
Yes, sir.
from the floor. Go ahead.
So I guess if it's behavioral based, I can talk about it.
Oh, no, yeah, we have people online, so we
And I will hear you better.
So if it's behavioral based, what's the difference between this and NIPS and HIPS techniques that have existed for like 20 years, 15, 20 years?
It goes
Like
much-
traditional network intrusion prevention
Yeah.
and host intrusion prevention systems.
No,
that have-
I understand you. It goes much faster. That's a difference. It goes
Based
much
on-
faster.
Based on what learning techniques?
Based on, first, the fact that our computers are very powerful, and also that they have been designed and programmed to get a lot more types of informations. That, from what I understand, to tell you the truth, that's a question for my doctoral student, my former doctoral student. But from what I understand, that's what it is. Now, I'll be happy to get back to him to ask that question.
Okay, one more, if you don't mind.
go ahead.
Please, go for it.
So is there a learning component that's based on external
Yeah.
threat information?
Yeah.
And like, where's that coming from? Because the most sophisticated attackers are government actors and like what are called
Well,
APTs.
you
They're
would
not going
be-
to provide that data. So
You would be very surprised. There is a lot of external information which depends on how you have programmed your stuff. But for example, another company has been attacked. Okay, so that. But they have to. Now they have to. You see, in fact, things have evolved, and for a long time, you would hide it under the carpets if you had been attacked. Now you cannot do that, and you're supposed to. You're supposed to say it to part of the government that's there. So you know generally who has been attacked, and you know some information about the characteristics of that attack, and that's a lot of external information. You also another point is new bad guys, new potential attackers. All of a sudden, there is a new group of people who is interested in what you're doing. And you're constructing, let's take Lockheed Martin since you're constructing an airplane and whatever, and something new. And then you have a whole new group of people converging towards your system, etc.
Elliot, go ahead.
Okay, really interesting. Hi, my name is Elliot. I'm a master's student here. So at the risk of oversimplifying, is it right to understand the honeypots systems as generating like a whole bunch of training data, and then you're using the feedback from users on a specific system to fine-tune it to their network?
Yes, to
Okay.
find some characteristics of the potential attackers.
Okay, so I guess I'm curious then what you see as the limitations of generalizing this across systems. Like how similar does the system have to be to the honeypot system?
How different? Your system?
How similar does it have to be for it to work? for you to actually be able to fine tune it and get something that's going to detect, because the behavior of these adversaries on the honeypot system might be dramatically different just because.
Oh yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you know that that it's for real? And it is true that some of the attackers who come to your honeypots are doing that just for the fun of it, and you don't know about it. Some will come to fool you, actually, and so that has to enter your uncertainties, etc. So you are right that the people who come to the honeypots are not to be taken at face value, let's say. And that's part of the talent of the operators and the designers of that system. And the military is, of course, very much into it. Let's say that Isaac came from a military background and had a military vision of all this. And that's
so you're saying that how a malicious actor behaves on that honeypot system is close enough to how they're going to behave on the actual system you're concerned about?
It depends on the actors.
Okay.
And that's precisely the challenge, is to observe the behaviors, to decide, well, what are the chances that they are going to behave in the same way when they really want to get to your core? Or what are the chances that they are just there to see what's going on in the world, of which you have quite a few people?
Well, yeah, I'll add one of the gaps in our sort of defensive posture is cyber actors are good at hiding their identities. In many cases, particularly criminal groups, they use a model that is sort of based on the criminals never knowing each other's true identities, organizing themselves in a fora where they're able to track reputation, but not necessarily identity. They share skills, and so what I found especially exciting about the presentation is the focus on actors and how this might yield more insight into actor behavior, which could prove vital to disrupting criminal networks. Again, who go to great lengths to keep themselves, their identity secret, not only from obviously authorities, but from each other as well.
Yeah, but that's not a problem for us. First thing, where are they? So that's where the question of time is of interest. Second, if they come back, then we think they have a good reason to do that, because they could have a better use of their time. So we are not looking at their identity as Joe Blow in whatever, but we are looking at their behavior.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good.
Joey from Australia. Just wondering, is it possible from a counter viewpoint to come up with like a...
I'm sorry, you have to speak a bit louder.
Got you.
And articulate, because I cannot hear you very well.
I'll try my best.
Okay.
So is it possible to come up with like a counter equation for this model? So could a bunch of hackers come up with like some statistics or equation that mitigates the way you guys are calculating behavior? For example, maybe they can have like a template attacking path and they modify it accordingly so that they can proceed further along and get more information from your system. And then even if like you, let's say, increase your threshold high enough that it overcomes these simple attacks, wouldn't that kind of achieve some of their aims in like making your system utility function, I guess, less optimized?
Okay, so let me make sure that I've understood. First, you're talking about the link between the actors and the decision makers, right? And the actors, can you repeat the part of the actors? I understand the decision makers at the end, but...
So I guess the question is it possible for attackers to come up with like a counter equation or counter model to basically like optimize the attack on your system?
Fool the decision makers?
Yes.
The answer is yes. They could do that. I'm sure that actors who understand our honeypots could manipulate them to fool us completely. But that's life. Let's say. The bad guys trying to fool the people that they are trying to attack. That happens all the time, but especially in this case.
It's the old spy versus spy game.
Yes, exactly.
Grotto, you have a question?
Thank you. Thank you so much for your talk. Building on what was just said, I couldn't help but think that having the kind of that data being fed back into the training data might create some problems if, like you said, they were able to avoid the kind of manual detection. So it's kind of dependent on getting a pretty immediate feedback on whether or not its decision was correct or not, right? To train it, which is easy with something like a ransomware attack where the effect is quite obvious. But if it's a more of an APT, like espionage attack, where they remain quietly on the server for months without being discovered, then that kind of false negative being fed back into the training data might not, not only did they get passed, they will then actively train the computer to ignore similar attacks in the future. Is this something you've thought about or have any mitigation strategy for, potentially?
Not me in particular, but I see exactly what you were saying, which is to try to identify the actors who are trying to fool your system and your database, so that I'm sure that my friend Isaac is my co-author is looking at that very, very carefully from his perspective, his army perspective at this point. But I have not done it. And yet, I see exactly what you said, because it affects the uncertainties, of course, in your results. And the question is how to link that possibility, the signals that you might get that this is happening, and the uncertainties that you have then in your the outcomes of similar attacks.
Well, I have a couple questions from our virtual audience. I'll start with a more technical question from Hisham Eldai. He says, you briefly talked about the connectivity in the system.
Oh, yeah.
How can you tell the system is transitioning to a chaotic state due to overconnections? Any robustness tests you recommend?
Thank you for your question. In fact, chaotic, you're asking me about the possibility of chaotic behavior. And in fact, it would be a very clever way, connecting to your question, to fool a system of that kind. Isham is relating that to the connectivity. I did not relate it to the connectivity because there we looked at the electric grid. But it is true that you could use that kind of tactic in the connectivity of a system. But I have not looked at chaotic behavior. And chaotic behavior would be, following what you said, a very good way of fooling the operators of a system of that kind. But then, of course, for the operators of the system, observing that there is something chaotic happening here and trying to circumscribe it might be one approach to that.
Another question from our virtual audience. This is from Roy Auerbach. It sounds like the AI is a neural network. Do the honeypots act as an initial input into training the network?
The initial impact. I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Do the honeypots act as an initial input for data into...
Not an initial input. The honeypots give us input. We have initial input in the design of the system. And then that system is enriched by what we observe through the honeypots. And that happens over time. So it's not the honeypots are not the initial information that we use. They are subsequent information that we use to do the updating.
How long do the honeypots run for? out of curiosity? Is it
As
days,
long as we
weeks?
want. As long as we want.
But
And- and I've-
for your first,
Oh, for us?
yeah.
How long has it been working for us? I would say about a year.
Okay, fascinating.
I would say about a year. In fact, Isaac was one of those officers who had 3 years to do his PhD.
The
That's
sense of urgency.
in that exactly. And that's why we start 6 months ahead of time to make sure we know where we're going when he arrives. But I think the honeypot, it didn't put the honeypots at the very beginning, let's say 1 year to 2 years. And I have not followed extremely carefully when he was putting it on.
Any takeaways that policymakers should bring from your presentation? What would you hope that?
What would I say?
Yeah.
First, know what you're doing.
Always good advice.
Know what you're doing. Know what there is inside your systems, and pay attention to the history of your attacks, and make sure to communicate it to the people with whom you should communicate it. Let me give you some kind of similarity. The nuclear power industry, in the beginning, had some problems. And they used to keep these problems behind, under their shirts and not share it. Well, it turns out that they created an Institute of Nuclear Power Operations where behind closed doors, they could exchange their experience and operate much, much better. That model, people have tried to reproduce it in many different places, but might be a useful one to make sure that whatever attacks has happened to Sony or whatever, the details of that attack are passed along to people to whom it could be useful, and who are not, of course, your competitors. You don't, that's always the problem in the market.
Any other questions? So
Well,
we're just about. Oh, go ahead. Do you
yes.
want to jump in? Oh. Yeah, sure. Oh, wait for the mic, please.
Is there any possibility of generative AI in this field?
Does anyone?
Is there any way we can use generative AI in this field?
You need to tell me.
Like a GAN.
Like ChatGPT,
Oh,
Stable
yeah, okay,
Diffusion, is
so-
there any
What are we
like
talking about? I'm sorry.
application? that
Yeah.
comes to
So
mind?
the question is how does? Let me see if I can capture it. We've seen obviously a ton of buzz over the past couple weeks about ChatGPT. Does the technology underlying that AI application have any potential applications for cybersecurity risk management?
The cybersecurity that you're talking about, in what system?
Well, so the AI techniques that underlie ChatGPT. Does that class or type of AI system
Wait.
have application to cybersecurity?
Most likely, but I do not really know, and I'm not going to make it up. Because that's my habit.
I appreciate that. Go ahead. I think this might be the last question.
Yes,
Go ahead. Yeah, you're good. I think I hear
help
you.
me if I don't understand.
To use, I guess, your language, nostalgia de la vu. Like, are you guys working with any actors? Like any offensive actors?
Any-
Active officers right now?
Yeah, like
Yes, I am. But let me tell you what my problem is. I can imagine a kind of clearance, top security, SCI. So one of the conditions that I have when the officers come is that they pick a topic that might be useful to the Army, to the Navy, etc., but that are not the military, the real military application. Okay? So find something that, for example, one of them, yes, was working on this question of connectivity, which is very important, as you know. Well, we have seen it in the Ukrainian-Russian conflict. Excuse me. So you want to make sure that you don't put too much connectivity. Yeah, that's a good idea. You don't put too much connectivity in your system, in fact. And but what the guy who has done his thesis, who is now at NSA, excuse me, had picked the smart grid to look at the advantages of new connectivity inside the smart grid. And so he could treat the same problem that they are going to encounter on battlefields, but in a different setting. So he could say whatever he wanted. And that's the way we treat it. So, and of course, never anything classified in any dissertation at Stanford.
Well, with that, please join me in thanking Dr. Paté-Cornell. Thank you very much. And just to preview upcoming winter seminars, we have on February 17th, this Friday, Jack Balkin coming in to talk about the Supreme Court's upcoming case on platform regulation. And then on Tuesday of next week, we have, I can't see, I'm going to turn around, Tongtong Zhang on Whose Voice Matters, Conformists, Nonconformists, and Authoritarian Responsiveness in China. With that, have a good rest of your day.